Tatiana lay on the bed in the dormitory, her face buried in the pillow. A strange paralysis gripped her entire being. It wasn't even pain, but bewilderment. "Why?" echoed in her temples. Just yesterday, she and Serge had been discussing their upcoming wedding, talking about the dress she would choose, how happy his mother would be, what they would say to the guests. And today, all of that turned into a dark abyss. Serge called, his voice sounding alien, suggesting they meet after work. There, on the street, stumbling over his words, he declared there would be no wedding, that he was ending their relationship, asking her not to call or write to him. Anya didn't have the chance to say anything. To ask, to object. She just stood there on the street. Then she wandered around the city, and when it got dark, returned to the dormitory. Serge didn't like this college dormitory, which had long been in need of repair, but she insisted on staying there until the wedding. Her thoughts were a jumble, and the modestly furnished room seemed terrifyingly silent. The two annoying lit department roommates were at their rural school internships. She was completely alone. Well, not entirely alone. Inside her, another being lived, which, like Tatiana now, curled up into a small, helpless ball. Tatiana was 4 months pregnant. It all happened unexpectedly, but Serge did not abandon the child. On the contrary, he seemed pleased, even introduced her to his mother, who held a prominent position in the city administration. The future mother-in-law, a youthful woman in her mid-40s, received her son's bride coolly, but did not oppose the marriage. They didn't talk much, but the young couple had other things to worry about. Tatiana didn't even hear when the door to her room opened. Someone approached her bed. She turned around and saw Madame Larissa standing before her. As always, her would-be relative was tastefully dressed. Her dark hair was styled fashionably, and her manicured hands clutched a small purse. "It's good that you're home," said Madame Larissa. "When Serge told me you had split up, I was worried. Girls your age are very emotional and often do foolish things." Tatiana found the strength to get up from the bed. "It's hard for you, I understand," her interlocutor continued. "But I know you haven't yet told your father about the wedding, and you don't have anyone else. So, I came here. After all, I bear responsibility for your child." Tatiana grimaced, but had no rebuttal. It turned out that Madame Larissa decided to spend the whole night. Their conversation was difficult, concerning the future of the baby Tatiana carried in her womb. Madame Larissa convinced her would-be daughter-in-law that the baby should be raised by her. She argued that Tatiana simply couldn't handle school, work, and caring for an infant, that it was too late for an abortion, and that she would take care of everything, comfortable medical care, the birth. She was also ready to arrange for Tatiana's transfer to a university in the neighboring regional city, so she could forget everything that happened as if it were a bad dream. Tatiana found it hard to take in her words, but by the morning of their heart-to-heart talk, she agreed to the offered conditions. Madame Larissa indeed arranged everything very quickly and precisely. She negotiated for Tatiana to take her exams early, rented a small country house for her with a quiet, elderly nurse, bought groceries, and took care of household matters. Ahead of the future mother was a summer, lonely and monotonous. Yet, it gradually passed, autumn came. Tatiana, now in an advanced stage of pregnancy, would wear an uncomfortable, wide dress, go out to the veranda, and sit for hours in a chair, watching the yellow leaves fall. Her son was born on October 19th. The birth was easy. Madame Larissa found the best doctors in the city, who treated Tatiana very gently. The next morning, the newly minted grandmother was already at the hospital. Tatiana silently signed the relinquishment documents. 3 days later, she was discharged from the hospital and immediately left for that regional city, where Madame Larissa had found her a university place. Tatiana was pleased with the transfer. She did not lose her scholarship spot, but whereas before she studied at a night faculty, barely imagining her possible job in a school, she now found herself in a psychology faculty, which she had dreamed of for many years. To get into this faculty, she once lacked the points, but now she could finally pursue the career she desired. and Tatiana immersed herself in her studies. She thought about Serge constantly, trying in every way to eradicate thoughts of him from her mind, but she seldom thought of her son. During childbirth, she barely saw him and didn't even hear his faint cry. Thinking about the past was too painful, so Tatiana sought activities that could distract her from the heavy memories. Time flew by unnoticed. Tatiana successfully completed her bachelor's degree and did not turn down the opportunity to enroll in a master's program. Interested in the fate of the talented student, one of her professors helped her secure a permanent job at the Center for Maternal and Child Support. Now, Tatiana worked as a psychologist, spending the first half of the day organizing consultations. Her salary was even enough for a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, which, after living in dormitories, Tatiana was incredibly happy about. She continued to study and work hard, but all her activities seemed to her only a way to occupy herself, to dive headfirst into pressing problems. She lived like everyone else, conducted psychological work with herself, and it was only the utterly lonely evenings and nights that reminded her that, in essence, she had no one in this world. Her father lived his own life, her mother had long passed away, her fiancé had left her, and she had given her own son up for adoption to another person. Despite interacting with people every day, she realized that she was living some parallel life with them, not truly living, but merely existing, like a daisy picked in the field and slowly dying in a vase of water. But one cold November evening, everything changed. She left the university, classes ended at 10 o'clock, and she had a good 45 minutes to ride home on the bus. The wind whipped up the wet leaves, swaying the trees that beat against the walls of the buildings. Tatiana approached the bus stop, lit by the artificial light of street lamps. There were few people around, and in the darkness, she suddenly saw a car stop, from which the driver got out. She recognized him. It was Serge, her Serge. There seemed to be nothing to say, yet he broke the silence. "You must be studying at the Pedagogical University? Mom finally told me where you were studying, even though she didn't want to." Tatiana silently nodded her head. "Why are you standing here alone? And no one to give you a ride? Want me to take you?" Tatiana was shivering with a fine tremor, but she silently and resolutely headed to the car. She opened the door herself and sat down. Serge silently followed her. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Semyon Sareta Street." "It's on the outskirts, old houses near the factory," Tatiana said in an almost unfamiliar voice. "Just drive ahead for now, and I'll show you how to go further." They drove in silence. 15 minutes later, Serge's car pulled up to the low-rise buildings. "Here?" Serge asked. "Are you there alone?" Tatiana nodded. "I can invite you in," she boldly said. "Just for some tea." They entered her building, passed through a long corridor with a row of doors leading to tiny apartments. Finally, Tatiana opened the door to her apartment number 37 for Serge. She turned on the light, revealing a modest dwelling with a small couch, a table with a chair, and a laptop sitting on the table, a microwave next to the refrigerator. "Spartan conditions," Serge noted. "Let me put the kettle on, I can feed you if you want," Tatiana responded. Serge silently sat on the couch and watched as she set the table. The tea was delicious, with raspberry jam and white bread, but the conversation was stilted. Finally, Serge spoke. "You know, Tatiana, I'm really guilty before you. But I didn't want to. Actually, I was shown a video at the time. It was you and another guy, looked like your classmate. You were kissing, hugging. So, I decided that you were cheating on me with him. Well, that's what they told me, and the facts were apparent. That's why I broke up with you then." Tatiana listened silently, though everything inside her turned cold. She suddenly realized how much she had loved Serge all this time, how much she missed his voice, his smile, the expression in his eyes. And now he would say something and leave again, and she would be left in this room again, completely alone. Serge continued, but the video turned out to be fake. He found out about it only 3 months ago. By chance, he went on a paid fishing trip with a friend, where he met the local guy responsible for it, who turned out to be the guy from the video. Serge remembered him well. "So, did I get angry?" he asked. "How's your wife Tatiana? Probably have kids by now?" The guy was stunned. "What Tatiana? My wife's name is Svetlana, and we don't have kids yet." Initially, Serge wanted to punch him because it was definitely him in the video. But then, as they talked more, it turned out that among his family videos on his social media page, there was indeed such a video, but it was his wife, not you. "You two look somewhat alike." They altered his wife's face to yours in the video. And then, I started digging deeper and understood how it happened. Who made the video? "Who?" Tatiana quietly asked. Serge hesitated. "Sorry, I can't tell you. It's complicated. But I now know that you're not to blame for anything." "And I am." They fell silent. Tatiana's heart was beating fast. If Serge understood he was wrong, maybe he would propose to make everything right again? Could she? Yes, of course, she could. But would he ask her? That night, indeed, everything started anew. But in the morning, as a happy Tatiana was preparing breakfast and getting ready for work, Serge told her that he had been married for 2 years. He had married at his mother's insistence, to the daughter of one of her influential colleagues. Marina, a lawyer in the regional ministry, had a positive attitude towards their marriage but preferred a quiet family life, meetings with friends, and noisy trips to foreign resorts. Just now, deciding that the autumn in the central strip of the country was dragging on, Marina took a week off at her own expense and dashed off to Egypt. Hearing that Serge was not alone, Tatiana for the first time during all this cried, tears rolling down her cheeks, and she could no longer hold them back. Serge started to leave. "Forgive me," he repeated, "for coming to you, I just couldn't help it, and then, I've always followed your life through your profiles on social media, WhatsApp, and Viber. You rarely posted anything, mostly about psychology, but I understood that you're alone, that besides study and work, you have no one." Marina was away, and I couldn't resist, but I will come to you again. "May I?" "I'll call then." They started to meet secretly. Serge came once every 2 months, his job didn't allow for more frequent visits. He worked in a prestigious position at a large enterprise, not hiding that his career was thanks to his mother's involvement. But even these brief meetings made Tatiana happy. They also started to exchange messages, sending each other simple videos, pictures, photos. Strangely, Serge never asked about the fate of their common son with Tatiana. Perhaps he simply didn't know that Tatiana had left the child with his mother, and she, ashamed of her actions, never brought up the topic. 3 years passed. Tatiana had completed her master's degree, found another part-time job at a school, and moved from her studio apartment to a modest one-bedroom nearby. There was more space for living. Though Serge now came less frequently, telling her about his endless work tasks. But Tatiana demanded nothing of herself. Life taught her to be content with little. On this autumn day, she was waiting for Serge, knowing he would appear any minute. The doorbell rang, and there was her guest and also a child, about 6 years old, on the threshold. Tatiana's heart clenched, because the boy looked just like her, as 2 peas in a pod. She realized whom Serge had brought to her home. The boy was shy at first in the new environment, but then he started to talk, telling her his name was Nicholas. He said it so importantly and pronounced his name, Nicholas, saying he loved to play on the computer and ride a scooter, and he preferred fried dumplings. Tatiana found dumplings for him, fried them in a pan, while her son joyfully explored Serge's new smartphone. While the young phone game enthusiast devoured dumplings with sour cream, Serge took Tatiana aside. "Our son," he began. "Nicholas, he doesn't know. Thinks I'm his older brother. Mom officially adopted him. Told me she took a child from the orphanage. But you understand, I always had doubts. He was so little and looked like you. But I never admitted to myself that he was our child. I thought it was just my imagination." My mom had told me back then that you had a miscarriage right after we broke up, that you were hospitalized for a long time, and then you deliberately transferred to another university. Supposedly, there was a doctor in the hospital who was an acquaintance of hers and told her everything, and then she introduced me to Marina. Tatiana listened to Serge in silence. It was my mom who arranged to make that video recording. I know exactly who made it, and for how much money. She was afraid of losing me. She thought that if we got married, I would drift away from her. And she raised me by herself. Loved me very much. Please forgive her. She was a decent person. It's just life. Why are you speaking about her in the past? Did Tatiana guess something? Serge looked at her. We buried my mom the day before yesterday. Rapid cancer. She knew everything 9 months ago. Asked me to take care of Nicholas. But she never admitted to me what she had done to you. You see, she fantasized about having another child. Wanted a girl, but my father, he drank, beat her. He was just a simple plumber, but such a handsome man. Played the guitar. That's why she fell in love with him. Wanted a big family, but it didn't happen. My sister wasn't born alive into this world. They divorced later. I hardly remember my father. So, my mom decided to take our child for herself. And Marina, she didn't irritate her like you did. Marina lived her life around me. But I only loved you and Mom. Now, I have to learn to love my son too. Tatiana cried. Mrs. Larissa arranged for my childbirth, and then asked me to sign a renunciation of the child. Now I understand everything. You will leave my son with me. I so want to see him by my side. To make up for all these years without him. I will take you with me. I'm getting a divorce. Just yesterday, I wrote the application at the registry office. Marina agrees. She's tired of all this time I lived with my mom. Says she doesn't need such a husband. Now we need to adopt Nicholas. But we will solve this issue somehow. Somehow.